Okay, I think it's working. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. I'm rejoined by 1+1's one of our favorite returning champions, and that is Polish independent journalist Malgorzata Kulbaczewka Figat, who is a correspondent and frequent contributor and co-host to Crossborder Talks, Transform Europe, and the Barricade. And the first two outlets cover all European affairs and international affairs, and the Barricade is a pan-Eastern European indie news outlet that offers a critical leftist perspective on Eastern European and international affairs. So, Malgorzata, my dear, first off, thank you so much for coming back on the program.
I knew it will happen, but hello again to you and everybody who is watching.
Yes, no, it's a real honor to have you back on, and I believe you're my second guest after because I was on a proper 2 week summer vacation, which I'm feeling what's the Portuguese term for it or the Brazilian term, saudade for. So it's good to have you back to help me, not fall into some Bermuda about that. But no, it's a real honor to have you back. And I have to say the following to people that yes, for the time being until November the 6th, I'm pretty much barred from uploading stuff on YouTube. So come check us out over at SoundCloud and go check us out at Odyssey. I got into trouble with into trouble with YouTube because we had a previous guest, and I think the powers to be did not appreciate our conversation on COVID, even though, anywho, who gives a shit? It happened, and people can watch that episode uncensored and a very good rational debate on what to do with the pandemic on Odyssey. So anywho, so Malgorzata, thank you so much for coming back on the program, and let's get into our first question. Now, originally, I was going to make this episode, a single topic episode and make it, no more than, 30 or 40 minutes. But there's so much going on, and I was, reading, some of the transcripts of, of previous articles you uploaded. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things today. But the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the following, which is, can you enlighten our audience on yet another Eastern European country, as if we didn't have enough of this enough of this nonsense across Africa, the Middle East, and yours truly, Eastern Europe, and a lot of former USSR blocs. Now, apparently, there's tension within Moldova between some who apparently want a divorce, and like Crimea, they identify as having a Russian background that they aren't ashamed of and want to secede. And I understand in Romania there is something similar, and it's funny enough because Boyan, when I was on, Pia Maria's program on the Barricades doing her thumbs up, thumbs down, Boyan, expressed to me, several times that he thinks, given the reactionary forces the West, groomed in Ukraine, the Nazi ethno-nationalists who lionize Nazi war criminals and their fellow countrymen of a Ukrainian Russian background, that Ukraine will be partitioned, that you'll have Western Ukraine become part of the U.S. Anglo-Canadian pan-pro-EU NATO bloc, and then Donbass, Donetsk, either they will be their own countries or one of the two will get married to Russia. So now the reason why I asked and mentioned all of that is this the same in Moldova with those of a Russian background in Romania with its Moldovan inhabitants, and yes, and I believe it's called Transnistria.
It's Transnistria.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that actually there is no comparison between Moldova and Ukraine because, first of all, Moldova is a tiny country. It's a very poor country. It actually ranks the very last in Europe. Perhaps now Ukraine will fall behind for obvious reasons, but in fact, Moldova is a country that for which the market transition was a real cataclysm, and you can't find anybody, hardly anybody in Moldova who would not admit that life before the fall of Soviet Union was actually better in this part of the world.
Okay.
So I don't think that the partition of Moldova is a very serious scenario to talk about, because, well, Moldova is like a party that nobody wants to take responsibility for. Moldova has been associated to European Union for a long time. It is a part of the Eastern Partnership Program, and it was even praised for its progress in anti-corruption or introducing European standards in the judicial structures. But still, everybody in Europe is pretty aware of the fact that bringing this country into the European fold would mean a lot of investment, a lot of, like reorganizing the country, in fact, from the very beginning. And I have really high doubts if European Union is ready to undertake on such enterprise now, being a neoliberal entity. And
So,
as far
so the transition to disaster capitalism has been disastrous for Moldova, and yet the capitalists of the world praise Moldova as like the model for a transition to voodoo economics, neoliberalism, whatever people want to call that, whatever people want to call that reactionary capitalist system, or.
Well, they praised them 10 years ago or so, when the level of corruption and of oligarchization was not that obvious, because Moldova, the free market Moldova, actually fell very quickly prey to local oligarchs who adopted a pro-European stance. They wanted to be seen as pro-European forces, to receive capital from Europe, to receive, like European recovery funds. And also they suggested that their power in Moldova is necessary because otherwise the society can turn pro-Russian and Europe will lose this part of the world as a sphere of influence. So there was a period when they were actually praised for introducing market reforms, even though the fact was that the level of the living standards of the society was subsequently going lower and lower, to that point that Moldova actually lost 1/3 of its population after 1991, because these people just emigrated to find jobs somewhere else, mainly in Italy, France, or somewhere, Roman-speaking countries are the natural choice, because ethnic Moldovans speak a language that is in fact Romanian with some local words, so it is easy to learn and so. But I think that this is the right moment that we actually explain what the fuck is Transnistria and what is the whole thing about. As you know, and as our listeners perhaps know, a lot of people in the Soviet Union were not enthusiastic about the prospect of their great homeland being divided, about the fall of the Soviet Union and waking up in independent countries. So the same applied to the good part of people living in the Soviet Republic of Moldova, and in particular to those who lived in the left bank of the Dniester River. Dniester and not Dnieper, not to confuse with the huge Ukrainian river. Dniester is a little bit to the west and to the south. So the population of the left bank was in fact much different from people who lived in the right bank in the same Moldovan Republic. They were more ethnically mixed because there were both Moldovans, there were ethnic Russians, there were ethnic Ukrainians as well as smaller communities like Bulgarians or the Gagauz people. This left bank was heavily industrialized under the Soviet rule, while the right bank was left an agricultural, more traditional area with predominantly ethnic Moldovan population. So when in the end of the 80s, the Moldovan national movement started to form, and like the call for an independent Moldova first resounded in the public sphere, this Russian-speaking community of the left bank of the Dniester started to feel endangered. Basically they felt that they will be now excluded from the new society in the new country because many of them did not speak Moldovan language. It was Russian who was the lingua franca in this ethnically diverse community.
And they were afraid of, and they were afraid that they would be met by racism because of that.
Yes, they were afraid that now they would be not only that everybody would need to learn Moldovan, which is quite a challenge for a Russian-speaking person, but also that they would be like treated like the second-class category citizens. And these popular feelings were even more supported, I would say, to a certain extent, they were supported by people who would actually lose on the fall of the Soviet Union. So, for example, the administrators of the state-owned factories, or the military stationed in Transnistria. They also persuaded people that they needed to. They persuaded people in the left bank that it was time to stand against Moldovan independence, that they needed to set up their own country. So as a result, in December 1991, the war break out between the right bank, the Moldovan right bank that had already proclaimed independence, and the Russian-speaking left bank. I am saying left Russian-speaking and not Russian because a lot of these people are not Russians. There are actually even ethnic Moldovans living there, but having a kind of Soviet multi-ethnic identity, not ethnic Russian. So the war lasted a couple of months. Most of them actually with a period of intensive fighting in June 1992, when the most bloody episode, which was the Battle of Bender, took place. Bender is the city on the Dniester River, the second biggest in Transnistria and the third biggest in Moldova. And in the end, the independence of the Transnistrian Republic was defended by the 14th Russian Army that used to be the Soviet army, that a part of the Soviet army that was stationed in Transnistria, and which in the decisive moment took the side of the Transnistrian militias, the Transnistrian partisans, we could say so. Basically, General Alexander Lebed, who stood at the head of this army, threatened the Moldovan government that he could easily advance from Transnistria into Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, and then go marching ahead into Romania, which was the key ally of Moldova at that moment. So the Moldovan government realized they would have no chance.
Sorry to interrupt. But did this guy believe in like a Greater Moldova, just like you have Albanians who believe in a Greater Albanian, or?
Well, that guy he was actually seeking to defend this Russian-speaking corner. Yes, he is. So at this moment, the Moldovan government decided they had no chance to stand up to the professional 14th Army, and that was right, because at that time Moldova had no real armed forces. It was all about volunteers and militias. And so the conflict was ended in July 1992, but both sides felt that was just a temporary stop. And Moldova is still claims that the lands in the left bank of the Dniester belong to them, because they want to have such borders as they had as the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. The Transnistrian population, on the other hand, claims they have nothing in common with the Moldovans, that they want either to stay independent and they want international recognition, or they want to join Russia. Yes, a couple of years ago, they actually voted in the referendum and expressed a will to be accepted into the Russian Federation, which Russia does not really want. For Russia, Transnistria is valuable as an asset that can be used to pressure Moldova, and not as another enclave that would be far away from Russian borders, that has no access to the sea, and that would probably need extremely high funding to keep some living standards there. The problem now is that both sides actually got used to the frozen conflict, as it is said. Transnistria developed its own oligarchy and oligarchical political connections, which we could discuss in more detail if you wish, because it is a really interesting case. Moldova took the pro-European, pro-NATO course and intends to join both the NATO and European Union, even without reintegrating Transnistria, even though they claim they want to. And there were a couple of there were attempts to settle the conflict. It was back at the beginning of 21st century. There were joint attempts by the European Union and by Russia to reorganize Moldova as a federal state, in which there would be two or perhaps even three parts, the third part being Gagauzia, so another region in the south of Moldova that is mainly inhabited by the Gagauz people, so the Russian and Gagauz-speaking Orthodox believers of Turkish origin. Yes, to make things even more complicated. But in the end, the attempt was not accepted by the government in Chisinau, who quite correctly understood that if Moldova consists of three equal parts, so the Moldovan, the Gagauz, and the Transnistrian part, then it will turn out that the Moldovans, the ethnic Moldovans, are the least represented nation, and perhaps the two other regions will be able to coordinate their actions and to decide on the general course of the politics of the country, which would basically mean Moldova being returned to the pro-Russian camp, because among the Gagauz, the pro-Russian, pro-Soviet sentiment is also very high. So in the end, what we get on the Dniester, we have basically the unrecognized state of Transnistria that has all the elements of the state: the parliament, the government, the president, the oligarchs, the football club Sheriff Tiraspol that you have perhaps seen if you are interested in Champions League. So the capital.
Not familiar with that, but continue.
They were a sensation in last season when they advanced to the Champions League, and they even won a match against Real Madrid. So they were quite a sensation, an unknown club from Eastern Europe. So coming back to the key things, so Transnistria has everything that a state has, but has no formal recognition. Moldova is a recognized country, which is, and one more thing. Both Moldova with a capital in Chisinau and Transnistria are economically dependent on an external partner. In the case of Transnistria, it is of course Russia that sells them cheap gas, that assures that the pensioners get their money on time, that they are higher than those in Moldova. And on the side of Moldova, this is the development packages, the support from European Union, and the last thing, there is now no enmity between Transnistrian and Moldovan people. In fact, there are communications between both those, if I can say, both states or both regions of Moldova, if you want. It is very easy to get the bus from Chisinau to Tiraspol. It is if the common people in Moldova were asked if they wanted to go to war for Transnistria, I guess that a lot of them would say that, well, what the hell for? And the problem is that there is a lot of misunderstanding and not a misinformation, but basically a misunderstanding among these two communities, which live next to each other but not together. Even though people from Transnistria often come to Chisinau to study in the local university, or they have their cars registered with Moldovan numbers because Transnistrians are not recognized anywhere, there is a lot of, I won't say false stereotypes on both sides. Like a lot of people in Transnistria believe that you can't speak Russian in Chisinau and don't get beaten up. Believe me, it won't happen. Or or that Moldova is very close to be annexed by Romania. This won't happen. Neither Romania is not really willing to do so. So there is no enmity, but a lot of misunderstandings, and nobody really having a clue how to solve this. So that is the situation.
Yeah, I mean, while you were talking, I thought, let me, I should have prepared this before the program, but I, thought, why, I thought I should look at a map of, Moldova, and, it's right in between, Romania and Ukraine, and I just was looking at, a map of this region, which has an affinity for Russia, where the Russian speaking Moldovans are based in, and so looking at that region, it's a very tiny slice of land,
yes,
very tiny, and hey, I'm not against the idea that you can literally have a city state. I mean that is literally what Singapore is, but it's right in between Ukraine and Moldova, so
you can travel the whole Transnistria in one day. Really, yes, it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it is a tiny piece of land. It has right now it has a population of less than 350,000 people. And it is also shrinking because, living in an unrecognized state has a lot of bad sides. So, yes, you can think it is absurd because it just can't have a future as a healthy state, as an independent state that needs to finance all the administration stuff and so on.
Because I mean, unless the Russians want to do what what the Brits and the Americans and the French do, which is you have your colony, your overseas territory like the Falklands, Gibraltar, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the Dutch Antilles. So I guess if Russia wants, they could do that. But at the same time, it's like we have enough problems as it is with with Crimea being married to us, with Ukraine, in which there's a possibility that that the country's going to split into 2 or 3. That. Yeah, I think for the Russians, I mean, strategically, it's a place that I guess you could have influence, but I think that country, Ukraine and Moldova, has enough problems of their own without having to, encourage this. So before we get off this topic, I mean. What's the solution to this? What have voices of reasons been trying to advocate?
Okay, so I guess I could say a little bit about Russia before I go to the voices of reasons. So yes, for Russia, basically the only point to invest in, as I said, in cheap gas for Transnistria, or to keep their army, because the Russian soldiers are stationed there as peacemakers since 1992. The only point is to have this influence over Moldova, and in the past perhaps they had also some plans with Ukraine and this part of the world, the plans that did not really work, because as you can see now, the forces stations in Transnistria are even too weak to be used in the war against Ukraine. There is no use for them. There was some moment in April where some military expert discussed the possibility of Russia attacking Odessa from 2 directions, basically from Mykolaiv on one hand and from Transnistria. And they came to a conclusion that the forces in Transnistria are just too weak to have any importance. So for Russia, the only point in keeping the influence over this part of the world is basically to have influence over Moldova, not to allow Moldova's European integration, and to suggest such solutions of the conflicts that would actually make Moldovan government dependent on the Russian-speaking and pro-Russian minority. Because nobody at the given moment today, it is impossible to think that Moldova could just easily integrate Transnistria into its own state structure. You know, there are people there in Transnistria. It is impossible for two reasons. First, as I said, Transnistria has its own oligarchy. It is basically 1/3, if not more, of all taxes paid in Transnistria comes from one company, which is the Sheriff Holding. And this is a company set by the people who were formerly working for Soviet services. And they are basically, they are operating everything in this unrecognized republic, from the supermarkets to, as I said, the Sheriff Football Club. But basically, they are everywhere in every possible economic part. And now imagine that.
But it's all very dodgy, all very much like in the black.
Yes, yeah. And now imagine that Moldova tries to integrate all this into its own economic system with its own oligarchs and its own problems. Well, that would be really, you know, all kinds of problems could appear because of that. And secondly, there is a collective memory of the people in Transnistria. There is the collective identity. It can sound absurd that this is such a tiny territory. What was it worth to fight and die for it? But people there really remember the year 1992 and how they defended the independence, how they decided to stand up for their independence. If you visit the city of Bender, so the place where the toughest fights were going on, you will find in the streets the plaques or the little monuments in the places where somebody was killed by Moldovan artillery. So there are a lot of places where the signs of the ruins of houses are left, so that people can see that just 30 years ago there was a battle here in this place for our independence. And this is not Russian propaganda. This is a collective identity of those people. They have developed already their own I don't know if the term exists in English, but the politics of memory, historical politics, where they explain that Transnistria is a kind of like Russia abroad, and that there is a connection between the wars that Russia fought with Turkey in the 18th century, then between the Russian Civil War, and then the Great Patriotic War, and finally the defense of the Russianness at the beginning of the 90s. So Transnistria has its collective identity, and people would not be happy if they were said that from tomorrow on they are back in Moldova. Yes. Or that they are annexed by Moldova, because even the expression of being back in Moldova, I guess, would raise doubts among many of them.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the thing is that Moldovan government is well aware of that. They are really well aware of this, and that is also why they did not really make serious reintegration attempts recently. And I think they are totally aware of the fact that Moldova cannot really offer anything significant as a good place for living. Moldova has problems with its own citizens going abroad. So how could it attract even more people who would also lose these limited benefits they have now living in Russia-supported territory, as the high pensions, as I said, or cheap gas prices. So if there is any solution of this conflict, it would have to take place in a totally different framework of both European Union, with a different Russia, and with a willingness, I would say, from European Union to invest in in a welfare state, or in securing a decent standard of living for everybody. Because there is one thing. There is one interesting thing. During the last presidential elections in Moldova, a lot of people from Transnistria who were entitled, because people from Transnistria are theoretically entitled to vote, as Moldova still considers the region the part of Moldova. So a lot of people from Transnistria who decided they cared about Moldova enough to vote for the president of Moldova did not choose Igor Dodon, the pro-Russian candidate, but instead voted for Maia Sandu, the woman who promised the continuation of pro-European course, but also an anti-corruption fight and securing some better life for everybody. You might think of her whatever you want. I have mixed feelings about her too. But the thing is that people in Transnistria actually had this thing, hey, we voted for pro-Russian guys all this time, and did Russia come to help us? No. Did Russia secure our better future? Well, not really. So, as you can see, there is some opening up in this community also for better options. And now, had Europe been socialist, or at least pro-social, had Europe actually cared to offer us in the East some decent alternative to market fundamentalist, it could have come with a proposal to reintegrate Moldova as a federation, to secure the status of all the languages spoken in the Republic, and also to make serious investments. As we know, Europe is not really willing to enter such projects, and so we are going to live with the partitioned Moldova for more time until the last Moldovan goes for emigration.
So do you think there's a chance that so final question before I conclude this part of the interview, because I think it's actually a very good place to end and then start part two. But then final question relates to this is given you have some Moldovans from Romania who would like to divorce themselves and I guess want to Greater Romania, and then given you have this very tiny part of Moldova that would like to see itself either married to Russia or maybe its own small Eastern European project, is there any chance that that will happen and people just have to begrudgingly go, okay, like we accept it, or do you think or do you think there's enough people in the new generation who say, okay, enough is enough, all right, you're allowed to speak your own language, we'll give you autonomy, whatever autonomy that's needed to get your economy developed, and then we put this issue to rest? Any chance of that happening? Or
I guess that if common people were asked to settle down the issue, they would have actually come at this point. Because Moldova has one successful example of granting the autonomy to the Gagauz region, so that preventing another conflict in a tiny territory. And the result is, well, that the Gagauz people speak Russian language or their own language. There is nobody speaking Moldovan in the south of the country, and yet these people are no longer thinking about any secession or setting up another yet tiny state. So I think that if common people were allowed to settle down the question, allowed to meet each other and to think if the federation could work, this could be possible. The problem is that the Transnistrian elites, or the elites connected to the sheriff holding, are not really willing to give up their tiny kingdom they are now having on the Dniester. This is a big business. This place is like a black hole when you can do all kind of business in the border zone. So
things that would make the Swiss and Luxembourgish blush.
So it is also, by the way, this is also the reason for which the Transnistrian elites did not want to join the Russian war on Ukraine. They were absolutely terrified on the prospect that the Russian forces from Transnistria may be actually called to march eastwards onto Odessa or whatever. They want their tiny black hole to keep existing so that they can do business there is, they will be able to continue for at least a few generations because there are still these 300,000 people living in Transnistria. All the basic services to them are being secured by sheriff. So they want just to continue things as they are. And without a really serious intervention by an external force that would at the same time guarantee basic rights to people, you can't really expect that this situation would change.
Unbelievable. Well, that's going to conclude part one of this interview. We were joined on this edition of 1+1, all things Eastern Europe, all things Moldova, with Malgorzata. I cannot speak today. Malgorzata Kulbaczewka Figat of Crossborder Talks and the Barricade. Join us soon. We will be right back.